video. So it looked like the Indiana Fever has signed another hardship player, but this young lady, we was calling for her to be signed months ago.
Or you're like, it's going to go one of two ways. Either she's hungry and she wants to get back to where she was and playing with the Indiana Fever under that microscope, even without Caitlin Clark playing, as we've seen with Ari McDonald.
The Indiana Fever thought they had their enforcer. Sophie Cunningham was supposed to be the bodyguard, the fighter, the one player who would make sure Caitlin Clark didn't have to fight every battle on her own. But in a cruel twist that feels all too familiar for Fever fans, Sophie didn't even get the chance. She's out, gone. Another name added to Indiana's endless injury list. And now, the Fever's season hangs in the balance.
And Aerial Powers steps in for the Indiana Fever in that role. Powers, has had a nice career across the WNBA. At one point was a bona fide scorer. When you go back to her time with the Mystics and the Lynx in the 2019 through 2021 kind of era, 2022, she averaged 14.4 points per game for the Lynx in 2022.
Again, enter Aerial Powers, signed not on some big multi-year deal, but on a hardship contract. Let that sink in. Caitlin Clark, the biggest star in women's basketball, is now relying on a replacement picked up out of necessity, not strategy. A former WNBA champion, a proven scorer, a player with baggage and brilliance all rolled into one. Aerial Powers has walked into the circus that is the Caitlin Clark era.
All right, so the Indiana Fever made the obvious move, which I guess is probably a good thing, right? When everybody's looking for a Sophie Cunningham replacement and the same name continues to come up over and over again, it's probably a good bet that said name is the best player available on the market. That's not to oversell it, but it is to say it was the pretty plain and clear direction the Fever were going to take, needing a guard/wing to replace Cunningham, especially given how glaring a position of need that is now.
And here's the burning question. Is this a lifeline for Indiana, or the moment that finally proves Caitlin Clark is at risk of being left stranded with no real help? Today on Her Hoops, we're breaking down the chaos, why Sophie Cunningham's loss cuts deeper than most fans realize, why Aerial Powers was both the obvious and the most controversial signing on the market. And for a franchise haunted by injury after injury, Cunningham was the security blanket, a role player who knew her job, knew her place, and wouldn't demand the spotlight.
Aerial Powers is the biggest name that's available. She is the biggest name that's available. She's somebody that has had good years in her career. Like in 2022, she averaged 14.5 points per game. In the Wubble, she averaged 16.3 in the game she played. She averaged 13.4 for the Lynx. And then she averaged 5 points a game for the Lynx in 2023. Averaged 8 points a game for the Atlanta Dream, but nobody wants her. What is the issue with Aerial Powers in general? It seems to be an attitude issue. It seems to be a willingness to win. It's never been a talent issue with Aerial Powers. She's a serious player.
But here's the problem. Indiana can't catch a break. Literally. Sophie Cunningham is out. Another blow to a team that already had one of the most fragile depth charts in the league. So the Fever were backed into a corner. Enter the hardship contract, a rule that lets teams sign an extra player when they've been ravaged by injuries. That's not a luxury move. That's not a front office master plan. That's survival mode. And who was waiting on the sidelines? Aerial Powers, the 5'9" guard forward tweener with a championship ring.
Below what I would like from a player, but honestly, Aerial Powers is a player that gets after it. She understands the game. She's athletic. And she adds a little size to the backcourt for the Indiana Fever. So I'm not necessarily mad at the signing at all.
A reputation for instant offense and a history of both spectacular highlights and frustrating inconsistency. She hadn't been on a roster. She hadn't been in the W spotlight. But with Indiana desperate for bodies, Powers suddenly became the biggest story in the league. So here's the problem. On paper, signing Aerial Powers makes sense. She's experienced, she's tough, she's proven she can score in bunches. She averaged double figures in multiple seasons and played a real role in the Washington Mystics championship run back in 2019. But this isn't 2019. Since then, Powers has been a roller coaster. Injuries, inconsistency, friction with coaches. In Minnesota, she showed flashes, scoring 20, even 25 in games. But she also disappeared for stretches and struggled to fit into a structured system. She's always been more of a heat check player than a glue piece. And that's where the core problem lies for Indiana. The Fever didn't just need another scorer. Caitlin Clark can handle that. Aaliyah Boston can handle that. What the Fever desperately needed was a reliable role player who could defend, set hard screens, take some hits, and make Clark's life easier. That's what Sophie Cunningham was supposed to bring. Aerial powers? She's the opposite of that archetype. She's not a quiet enforcer. She's not a background bodyguard. She's a streaky scorer who thrives when the ball is in her hands, and the ball is already glued to Caitlin Clark. This sets up an immediate clash. Can aerial powers adjust her game to be Caitlin's protector instead of Caitlin's competitor? Or will she demand touches, minutes, and attention in a system that was never designed for her? And let's not ignore the elephant in the room. Caitlin Clark is already taking brutal hits every single night. Hard screens, hip checks, elbows. We've all seen the replays. Clark is targeted more than any rookie we've seen in years. Because when you're the face of the league, you're also the bullseye. That's why Cunningham's loss feels catastrophic, and why Power's arrival feels like a gamble that could backfire if she can't step into a role that's not natural for her. Alright, let's talk about the stakes, because they're enormous. If aerial powers doesn't work out, Indiana isn't just losing a role player. They're losing the fragile safety net protecting the most valuable asset in women's basketball, Caitlin Clark. Think about it. Clark already led the league in minutes as a rookie, grinding through games with defenses keying on her like she was Steph Curry and Diana Taurasi rolled into one. She took more contact than almost any guard in the league. She had nights where she was double-teamed 30 feet from the hoop, and that was with Cunningham penciled in as her backup muscle. Now, without someone to absorb the dirty work, all that punishment falls squarely on Caitlin's shoulders. If Indiana can't find someone to protect her, either physically on the court or by demanding respect from defenders, the risk of injury skyrockets. And here's where history matters. Go back just a few years, Sabrina Ionescu's rookie season. Remember? She had one of the most hyped debuts in WNBA history. She looked unstoppable until she turned her ankle, missed almost the entire season, and had to claw her way back to full strength. The Liberty stumbled for years because their star wasn't at 100%. Indiana cannot afford a Sabrina repeat. Not with Clark. Not with this moment. Not when attendance, merchandise, and TV ratings are literally tied to her presence on the floor. That's why this signing feels so massive. It's not about whether aerial powers drops 15 points in a game. It's about whether she can fill a void that, if left empty, could derail Caitlin Clark's entire trajectory. Because let's be real, the Fever aren't winning a championship this season. That's not the goal. The goal is growth, development, and keeping Clark healthy long enough for the franchise to build the right roster around her. But without someone stepping into that enforcer role, without someone absorbing the heat, this season could spiral. And if it spirals, the criticism isn't going to fall on aerial powers. It's going to fall squarely on Caitlin Clark's shoulders, and she's already carrying more than enough. So let's be honest, Indiana didn't have a lot of great options. The hardship contract pool isn't exactly stacked with all-stars, but the decision to go with aerial powers still raises eyebrows, because there were other directions the Fever could have gone. For example, they could have doubled down on defense. There are veterans out there who may not light up the scoreboard, but who bring toughness, physicality, and that "you're not touching my point guard" mentality. Players like a Lexi Brown type when healthy, or even a Tiana Hawkins, gritty vets who know their role. But those names don't sell tickets, and they don't carry the upside of a player who once averaged nearly 17 points per game. Indiana chose upside over stability. That's a bet, and it's one they had to make fast. Now zoom out and look at the rivals circling, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The Eastern Conference is brutal right now. The New York Liberty? They're a super team stacked with MVP-level talent in Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and Jonquel Jones. The Connecticut Sun? Tough, disciplined, and battle-tested. Even the Atlanta Dream and Chicago Sky are scrappy and getting better. If Indiana fumbles this roster decision, they're not just missing the playoffs, they're getting run off the floor by teams that smell blood. And let's be clear, opposing defenses are already scheming, already saying, "Make Caitlin Clark beat us by herself. Wear her down, test her patience, hit her every time she comes off a screen. Without Cunningham, without an enforcer, that becomes 10 times easier. And here's the kicker. Rival teams know exactly what's happening. They've seen this movie before. A young superstar carrying a weak roster, getting targeted, getting frustrated, and eventually breaking down. If Indiana doesn't solve this, they risk repeating history while the rest of the league grows stronger and deeper. Which brings us back to Aerial Powers. She wasn't just signed to fill a roster spot. She was signed because Indiana looked around, saw the alternatives, saw the rivals, and said, "We need someone who can punch back. Now." The gamble is whether Powers can actually be that someone. Let's get real. The Fever locker room is already a powder keg. On one side, you've got Caitlin Clark, the golden ticket, the face of the WNBA, the player whose jersey sales are breaking records. Every camera, every microphone, every headline gravitates to her. That's not her fault. That's just reality. But star power like that can warp a locker room. It creates unspoken tension. Veterans who've been grinding for years might feel overshadowed. Younger players might feel pressure to prove they belong. Coaches feel the heat to win now, even if the roster isn't ready. Now drop Aerial Powers into that mix. Powers isn't shy. She's outspoken. She's fiery. She's been on record saying she doesn't want to just ride the bench. She wants to play. She wants to score. She wants to matter. That confidence can be a spark, or it can be gasoline on a fire. Here's the potential clash. Caitlin Clark needs teammates who are willing to sacrifice, set hard screens, dive for loose balls, take charges, and let her run the offense. That's exactly the kind of role Sophie Cunningham was built for. Aerial Powers? She's built different. She's used to being the offense, to having the ball in her hands. If she embraces the protector role, she could become Caitlin's fiercest ally. If she doesn't, suddenly you've got two players competing for touches, competing for attention, and sending mixed signals to a team that's already fragile. And remember, this isn't just about X's and O's. This is about personality.
Powers is fiery, Clark is fiery, Aaliyah Boston, the quiet superstar, is stuck in the middle. If those personalities mesh, Indiana has a fighting chance. If they clash,
The Fever could implode from the inside, long before the playoffs even come into view. This is the emotional tightrope Indiana just stepped onto, and it might be even more dangerous than anything happening on the court. So what happens next? Let's lay out the scenarios.
best case scenario, Aerial Powers embraces the moment.
She buys into the protector role, channels her fire into energy plays, and gives the Fever the toughness they desperately need. She doesn't just score in bursts. She makes a statement that Indiana isn't going to let Caitlin Clark get pushed around anymore. Suddenly, the Fever aren't just a young team. They're a gritty team, a team that fights, a team nobody wants to play in a playoff chase.
Worst case scenario, Powers tries to play hero ball. She demands shots, gets frustrated with her role, and throws off the chemistry between Clark and Boston.
The locker room splinters. The offense bogs down. Caitlin takes even more hits, and instead of protection, she ends up with more pressure. If injuries pile up, this could be a season that sets the Fever back instead of pushing them forward.
Most likely scenario, somewhere in between. Powers has nights where she looks like a spark plug, scoring 15, maybe 20, getting the crowd hyped. But she also has stretches where her fit feels awkward, and Indiana is left wondering whether she's a short-term fix or just a stopgap until Cunningham returns.
The team treads water, flashes potential, but still falls short of being a real contender. And that's the razor's edge Indiana is walking on. One decision, one hardship contract, and it could swing Caitlin Clark's rookie campaign in either direction. So here's where we leave it. The Indiana Fever made their move. Aerial Powers is in. Sophie Cunningham is out, at least for now. And the question hanging over everything is simple. Can Aerial Powers protect Caitlin Clark, or will this gamble end up putting Clark in even more danger? Because this isn't just about a roster shuffle. This is about the future of a franchise, the health of the most hyped rookie in WNBA history, and whether Indiana has the guts and the grit to keep their star safe while building towards something bigger. But now I want to hear from you. Was signing Aerial Powers the right call? Or did the Fever just take a huge risk that could blow up their season? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button if you're riding with us, and don't forget to subscribe to Her Hoops for more deep dives on the biggest stories in women's basketball. Because trust me, this saga is just getting started.